Welcome back and thank you for staying with us on The Conversation. Now, Mozambique is facing a complex crisis following the October 9, 2024 election marked by tensions and violence. The Frelimo candidate, Daniel Chapo, won the presidency with 70.6% of the vote, but numerous inconsistencies in the electoral process have raised questions. The opposition party, PODEMOS, has accused the government of electoral fraud, and its presidential candidate, Venancio Mondlane, claimed he survived an assassination attempt in South Africa, who in turn has closed its main border with Mozambique as the post-election protests escalates. Now, Mondlane called for peaceful demonstrations, leading residents in central Maputo to make noise from their homes, banging pots, whistling, shouting slogans like, "This country is ours." Now, joining us on The Conversation to speak more on this, we have Bakarr. He is a Presidential Research Professor of Sociology, Northern Illinois University in the U.S., joining us to speak more on this. Thank you so much for joining us, Bakarr.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so let's begin with the most recent incidents that has actually happened, from when the whole elections and protests actually started. And I'm talking about, we know that regional and international reactions, have actually come with the post-election turmoil. How will the closure of South African main border with Mozambique affect trade, travel, and regional stability, especially amidst the rising crisis?
Well, generally, those are like typical kind of reactions when you have, turmoils and, fears of instability. But I think, depending on how things unfold in Mozambique, most likely South Africa will not keep it for too long. But I think if things are to further degenerate in Mozambique, then South Africa will have to, put more effort in getting the situation under control. I think the close of the border is just a kind of reaction, but really, the key is really what happens in Mozambique. So I think my take is that the interest of the South African government will be to see things resolve instead of actually having a long border closure. So this will just be most likely a temporary kind of measure to see how things go.
Yeah, of course it is. Now, let's talk about the peaceful demonstration in central Maputo organized by Venancio Mondlane. What does this reveal about, the growing discontent with the current government, and talking about how the internet shut down, the police response, how does this reflect the authorities' attempt to control dissent?
So I think, all of these things really goes back to the nature of governance and the nature of elections, certainly in Mozambique, but also, things that we have seen in many other countries. And I think it goes to the fundamental problems, and that is how credible are elections. Now, it is true that, in Mozambique, in this case, the opposition seems to be fractured. So you cannot really preclude a real, a government win. But the central question really is how the elections were organized and how credible is it. And by many of the reports that are coming out, I think there are really good reasons to believe that the credibility of the elections are really in question. So I think...
okay, now just before you go ahead, now speaking of credible elections, even the international observers, including those from the European Union, have actually pointed out discrepancies in the vote count in Mozambique in the elections. Now, what were the specific issues that they raised? Do you have an idea?
Well, I don't have a deeper insight into it, but generally, what happens when you have in electoral malpractices, it comes in multiple forms. One is then in the form of tampering with the electoral roll, that is to say, having inaccurate names. Number two, it may come actually in manipulation of actual data. And the third thing, of course, will be intimidations, that goes on during the election period. So those are like the common ingredients or kind of things that happens whenever you do have election manipulations, and of course, in some cases, outright, fabrication of results.
Okay. Now let's talk about the claims, that's the reported assassination claims, by Mondlane in South Africa. Now, given this particular claim, he talked about an assassination attempt on him while he was in South Africa. How credible are these allegations?
I mean, I don't know, the details of it, but one thing that is important to note is that I think two of his close associates were actually killed in Mozambique. Now, does that actually categorically say that there was an assassination against him? I don't know, but I think the broader point is that really in a democratic political system, both candidates and people involved should be actually comfortable enough to stay in their country. If they do actually have a good reason to actually flee their country, I mean, that actually speaks to something. So and I think you have to go back to the history, of the country to see whether political assassinations and those kinds of things are common. And I think again, without actually being privy to what really happened in this particular person, but the circumstances and the history will not preclude those kinds of things.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the demonstrations. Now, we actually got word that there's an expected influx of over 3,000 demonstrators, from various provinces to Maputo. And this is actually what a lot of government actually fear. Now, how will this surge in participation affect both the government's response and also the prospects for meaningful political change?
So the response, whenever you have these kinds of crises, typically you do have two kinds of response. One is the use of force, the use of security forces to block and restrict the movement of demonstrators and restore some kind of order. The other one, of course, is what may go behind the scene in terms of what kind of outreach exists between the opposition and the government, and also what kind of mediation happens in there. So those two things may actually go simultaneously, hand in hand. In this case, actually, I don't know, I guess, any back channels, but I think those are typical things. Now, I guess what really follows from that, I think the more important thing really is to understand that in these kinds of political situations where institutions, really not, I guess, to put it very mildly, not capable of organizing credible elections, where you do have corruptions, where you do have distrust, where you do have fragmentations along ideological, ethnic, or even regional lines. Wherever you have these kinds of consolidation of things, I think it's important to understand that the political system has to be one that is geared towards compromise and reconciliation, because otherwise it will just continue being endless fights. So I will be more interested to see where are the opportunities for compromise, where the opportunities for forming of some kind of compromise systems, collusions, and so forth.
Okay. Now we also heard of widespread destruction of Frelimo party infrastructure and also police stations. How would you say, how will this affect both the country's long-term political stability and its economic recovery?
So Mozambique has a long history of instability, going back to the Cold War, colonial or post-colonial conflict between UNIMO and Renamo. They did gained some, significant peace after that conflict was resolved. But we know that currently there is an insurgency going in the north, inspired by Islamists, but really largely a conflict over resources and marginalization. So we know those things are actually there. So I think anything that actually adds to the distrust of the credibility of the legitimacy of the government, I think it's a cause for concern, both in terms of how it may connect with the insurgents in the north, but also new kind of fractures that may emerge. I think from the economic disruptions, there has been significant disruption. So Mozambique is a largely mineral-based based economy and migration to South Africa in particular. So whenever you do actually have significant violence, I mean, the exploitation of minerals, I mean, tend to be disrupted a lot. So I think, again, it depends on how long this goes for. But if it does continue into much more deeper violence that connects with the northern, crisis, then you may expect to see even much more deeper economic crisis than what they do have at the moment.
All right. Now, Frelimo has actually been in power since 1975, making it one of Africa's longest ruling parties. Now, how does its extended rule impact Mozambique's democracy?
Well, I mean, Mozambique's democracy, like most of the democracy in Africa and in many other places as well, has to be placed in quote. So I think we should be careful not to just go by the kinds of elections that are organized to equate that with democracy. Democracy means far much more than just having some kind of elections. But to your point, to your core point, I mean. So Frelimo has been there, ever since, going back to the struggle for independence, and it has, stayed on. Granted, I mean, they just got a new kind of leader like this, Chapo. Daniel Chapo is, by reports, I mean, he is, I guess you can call him a new breed of person that is not tied to the old guard, but. To the extent that, I mean, you think of Mozambique as being fractured along this, ideological regional kind of lines where you have on the one hand Frelimo and the other one you have Renamo. And I think the perpetual continuation of one-party rule, especially in the context where that party is known for, corruption, and it is also known for, representing the interests of certain groups, that is a problem. That is a significant problem. Again, it doesn't really matter how you think of elections are conducted or not, but I think having a one-party rule or a rule that is dominated by one set of people, that really doesn't bode with the essence of what democracy is.
All right. Now, Bakarr, there were reports or accusations against Rwanda's military, which they denied. They denied any involvement in suppressing protests, in Maputo, claiming that its forces are stationed in the northern province of Cabo Delgado to fight jihadists and not within Maputo. Now, given this context, do you believe or do you think that Rwanda's presence in Mozambique has any influence on the internal political situation, especially in light of the ongoing protests and unrest?
Well, security is a holistic kind of issue. I mean, I know we tend to think of compartmentalization, the north and the rest, but at some point, I mean, you cannot really do boundaries on insecurity. So, it is true that, I mean, the deployment of Rwanda and other forces there, we are actually, geared towards fighting Islamists in the north. But I think if you go back to that particular issue there and ask why and how it connects to the rest of Mozambique, two things you will note. One is that the struggle or the insurgency in the north, that is Islamist insurgency, it is actually not devoid of the issues of governance and corruption. So I know we call it Islamist, but really, I mean, we should keep in mind these are not really Islamic or religious kind of wars. These are really political wars. These are political insurgencies for marginalization. So in that sense, I guess what happens there, I mean, is connected to Mozambique in general in terms of corruption and poor governance. Number two, when the Rwandans and others, I mean, including Russian and mercenaries and other forces, when they're in the north, I mean, it is true that that's their primary mandate. But if things degenerate somewhere else, they will be most likely be involved in that. And also the other thing is that the reason why they are in the first place is really to support the government. Is to support the government of Mozambique. Now, the government of Mozambique was more vulnerable in the north. So if it becomes again more vulnerable in other places, logically, you will assume that they can also be moved here. So again, I wouldn't be surprised to see forces that have been deployed in the north are shifting or helping or being involved in other parts of Mozambique as things evolve.
Okay. Now, speaking of, things evolving, we all know that, due to the unrest, at least 11 people have reportedly been killed. That's in clashes between protesters and the police in Maputo. Now, this is still talking about the security. But how would you evaluate the government's response to the demonstrations? There have been concerns that they've been using excessive force and all that. Does the excessive use of force signal a worrying disregard for citizens' rights, to peaceful protest and also freedom of expression?
Well, I mean, my personal take is that the way African government responds to protests is always wrong. That's my own personal view. And I say that because there are really two things involved. Whenever you have, kind of a breakdown on law and order, I mean, it is important, of course, for the security forces to go there and restore some kind of, security around life and property. That is expected and that is right. But I think there are two things that are involved, and I think we should be very, clear about them. One is that the manner in which those forces are deployed and used, and of course, when you talk of, gross violations of rights of people, that is important to note. But more importantly, really, is to ask, why do you have these demonstrations? Why do you have these grievances? Why do people actually go and protest? And I think it is very easy to just label them as, well, people who want to cause trouble or people who don't want to follow the law. But that is a much more simplistic answer. The real truth is that actually people do have legitimate grievances. And I think the right response would be to actually for the governments to be sincere, to understand the roots of the problem, and really, address them, in a way that is, that seeks to really respect the rights of the people and also be in the spirit of real democracy. So the short answer to your question is that the response, the immediate and short-term response should be to restore security. But the more profound, the more lasting, the more fundamental response will be, how do you actually address the grievances? And to say that the grievances are illegitimate, I think that would be very, very dishonest.
Okay. Now, the most important thing is that, when it comes to elections and there are people who do not agree, the most important thing we in Nigeria or, usual stakeholders actually say is go to court, right? Take it to court, go and appeal and everything, rather than protest and, fight and everything. So, but then PODEMOS has brought their case to the Constitutional Court, alleging electoral fraud. How independent and effective is Mozambique's judiciary in addressing allegations of electoral misconduct? Do you believe that the court has the capacity to impartially handle such high-profile case in a politically charged atmosphere?
No, and so you have, so really to understand how independent or how, I guess, true our judiciaries to, political cases or election cases, you have to look at their, I guess, the way they conduct themselves, before and in other areas. Generally speaking, we know that again the judiciary in Mozambique, I mean, has a long history of actually corruptions and lack of independence, so to speak, or professionalism. So when you see those kinds of things in many other instances, in the history of the country, when the judiciary is actually not known to be impartial and corruption-free in the general conduct of the affairs, then it will be very difficult for one to assume that they will be independent when it comes to political cases. I think, imagine really a judiciary that has a long history and credibility in all matters, in handling cases. If that judiciary is to deliver a verdict on a political case, one is more likely to believe it because it has a history. Now, when you do have a judiciary that actually has a history of corruption, history of incompetence, why will one actually believe that it will hand a fair judgment in a political case? But I think, as we know, this is not a question of Mozambique. I mean, this is, for lack of a better word, I mean, it's the markers of actually again countries that are still politically, developing, practicing forms of democracy that are really not real democracies. So I think there's a lot to be improved in that area, not in Mozambique.
Well, this protest has actually, disrupted various sectors, talking about the healthcare and education and all that. And will these actions be able to impact Mozambique's already fragile economy?
So these are the challenging things and dilemmas of political violence, and it doesn't really matter what's the legitimacy of the grievance. In other words, whenever you do have political violence, even in this case, maybe you say for a legitimate political grievance, it does create disruptions to daily life, which in some cases the cost may be, for some people, may be much more higher than actually the political value. So I'm not suggesting that actually people should go out and demonstrate and cause political chaos in all cases for the democracy, because democracy itself actually has to be seen in context with other things. So sure, I mean, this will cause economic disruptions. It will cause economic hardship. And again, depending on how long it goes, it will cause all those things. And I think at some point, I mean, the population may not really be able to sustain that. And I think this is a common thing that we see across Africa, where, I mean, opposition efforts to hold government accountable through civic and mass demonstrations often fade, because at some point the citizenry will not be able to actually absorb the social and economic burden of that. Again, unfortunately, I mean, this gives those in power more leeway. But I think the better way to really approach these things, instead of coming to periodic violence after every so often, is to really go back to fundamentals, address root causes of conflict and decency in your governance, and I think, and be inclusive. And I think if you take that approach, you will have less demonstrations and less conflicts.
All right. Now, just before you go, just in general, would love to hear your final thoughts, and also, given the mounting tensions as well, because we still hear that this particular protest is far from over, including allegations of fraud, political violence, and police crackdowns. Is there potential for political reconciliation, or will these events actually lead to a deepening crisis and push further polarization in years to come?
Right. So I think the potential for both exists here. If you just look at the history of Mozambique. So on the one hand, we do know that actually there was a reconciliation between Frelimo and Renamo. So we know that. I mean, and they have actually reconciled in many ways. In fact, there are some people who actually see those two parties as almost being, colliding, and this is why the new party actually emerged to begin with. So there is a history of reconciliation, which should be a starting point. But I think you have to actually reconciliation for what purpose? Because if it is just for the elite to go and share power and engage in the same old corruption, I think that restores some peace. But again, it misses the fundamentals. Now, if you're talking of really reconciliation, when people go back to the basic question and ask what is really the issue, and try to be fair to one another, and that is to groups and communities, I think that's a different part. So, I would hope that actually, again, they go back to fundamentals, not just to do elite reconciliation and hug themselves and keep on doing the same corruption. So that's the one part there. The other part in which that this can really go bad, is that there is an insurgency in the north, and that should be taken very, very seriously. Now, to the extent that, there's a common element here between what is what is going on in the north and what is happening here, and that is corruption, poor governance. So the insurgency in the north fundamentally is about really, it's a fight against a government that is irresponsive to its citizens, and what the demonstrations here are also is about really trying to hold the government accountable. So I think that is being alleged, corruption is being alleged. So in that sense, I mean, there are similarities. And again, when you do have conflicts, when you have war, when you do have violence, the logistics of violence actually spreads, and it can easily, mix with one another. So yes, there is a danger really there that actually either the northern conflict comes south, or this one actually feeds into that. So again, I will say, in sum, I will say there are elements of both, tracks in Mozambique history of reconciliation, or actually further degeneration. And I hope, they choose the path of reconciliation, and one that actually goes to fundamentals as opposed to really just, keeping the same old things.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bakarr, for staying and also speaking to us on this. Now, I'm being told that Bonga Abdala Merace, political scientist from Maputo, has actually joined us. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, so go ahead and speak to us, on the happenings in Mozambique, most especially, the protests that have already happened. It's currently happening, and the fact that more people are coming in from provinces to the city to join in the protest. So there's expectations that it's going to be more violent than this. Please go ahead and share your thoughts. All right, we lost Bonga there. So back to you, Bakarr. Now, please, can you give us your final words? Let's have your final words before we wrap up this particular topic.
So I think I guess my final word really goes beyond Mozambique, and that is, we keep on seeing a repeated pattern across Africa, in this case Mozambique, but when, we are told that countries are democratic and they keep on holding elections, and then you have political violence, elections results not accepted, and we see this as a common pattern throughout the African continent. I think really my suggestion really here would be that African countries, African leaders need to really think very deep down about what really democracy is, and not to really misunderstand democracy as simple, going to elections and saying, okay, I win 51% or whatnot, and I take everything. Democracy goes much more deeper than that. It means a representation of people. And you have to understand, as people are not just as individuals, but also ethnic groups, regional groups, ideologies, and so forth. And you have to produce a political system that is actually inclusive of diversity. If your election do not produce that, then it is really not democratic. And when you keep on holding, elections that produces winner-take-all kind of outcomes, people will not accept those results because it doesn't lead to representation. So my suggestion really would be that Africans really need to think again, really what is democracy and how do we actually make it work beyond simple formalistic, elections, which may or may not be credible.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Bakarr, Presidential Research Professor of Sociology, Northern Illinois University. Thank you for your time and speaking so passionately. And I actually love how you charged African leaders to try and understand democracy. And we hope they actually heed to your advice. Thank you very much.